good morning. So yes, welcome. My name's Helen. I'm Strategy Director at Forward Action. I'm going to be hosting today and doing the Q&A at the end. So today we've got our webinar is going to be led by Ross, who is one of our digital strategy managers, and also Flo, who is one of our digital strategists. And Florence is also here from our partnerships team. She is working the chat and the Q&A and keeping everything running nice and smoothly for us. So yes, if you don't already know us, Forward Action is a digital mobilization agency. We work with progressive causes and we help people find other people online who care about their cause using digital channels. And we do everything from strategy to advocacy campaigns, fundraising campaigns, technical builds, social media, anything digital. And today we're going to be focusing on something that's been a really hot topic in 2005, which is Meta. So I'm sure that is a really valuable channel to lots of you. It's really a fantastic tool for driving your work, reaching new audiences, but it's always changing and it's always testing us. So that's what we're going to focus on. If you're trying to keep up with everything that's changed this year, like us, this is what today is all about. So hopefully some useful explainers as to what's going on and practical tips. Today is very practical. We want to give you lots of very concrete ideas that you can go away and try on your Meta programs. So before we jump into the content, just a few things that I need to let you know. So first of all, you can enable closed captions at the bottom of your screen if that's helpful for you. If you have any other accessibility issues or tech issues, let us know in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll try and sort those out for you. We're hopefully going to have quite a lot of time for a Q&A at the end because we think this will be a topic where lots of you have specific questions. So do use the Q&A function to leave your questions as we go through, and we're going to pull those together at the end and put Ross and Flo on the spot with those. And yes, and please also use the chat. I know lots of you are specialists in Meta. You'll have been trying things yourself. This is such a great forum for people to kind of share their experiences, tell each other what is working. So please do use that and tell us how you're experiencing the things that we are talking about. And we're going to record the session, so you will get a copy of that by email in the next few days, along with the slides that we're showing you. So you shouldn't need to take too many notes. I think that is it. So lovely to see all your messages in the chat about where you're from. Some familiar names there, so good to see you. I'm going to hand over to Ross to get us started.
Thanks, Helen, and hi everyone. Yes, lovely to have so many people joining us. And yeah, really excited to talk you through the latest changes in Meta. I'm sure you're all really eager to understand more about what they are and particularly how they might impact you and your campaigns. So just to give you a quick sense of what the next hour is going to look like, I'm going to be presenting alongside my colleague Flo. We're going to start off giving you a bit more of an explanation of exactly what the latest tracking changes are, what they mean, and who they're likely to impact. But then we want to spend most of the session trying to give you some really practical, useful advice on what you should do as a result of these. And we split that into two sections. Firstly, kind of adaptations you can make within Meta, so how you might want to structure your campaigns differently, some things you might want to be thinking about and testing. But then we also want to talk about what these changes mean for you beyond Meta, and some changes that you might want to think about in terms of your wider strategy. And to be honest, lots of things that are really best practice and great kind of advice anyway, but they just become even more important in light of these changes. And then, as Helen said, yeah, we want to leave plenty of time for your questions. So please do drop them in the Q&A throughout. And hopefully we'll have lots of time to get through as many of those as possible as we go. So yeah, we also want this session to be as practical, as useful as possible. So we've created a bit of a personal action plan. So if you'd like to, hopefully someone's just dropping a link in the chat. And if you go to file and then make a copy of that document, it's just a bit of a document that you can take away with you and make some notes as we're talking about things that you might want to think about, things that you might want to go away and practically try. So we hope that proves useful as we go through. But yeah, first up, we thought it'd be good to set out what the changes are and what they mean. So since January, the start of this year, Meta, as usual, without giving us a great deal of heads up, they always like to keep us on our toes, but they started restricting pixel and conversions API event data for some websites. And at the moment, that's mainly websites with health related content. So, yeah, if you're a charity working in the health sector on health as an issue, you may already be impacted by these changes, but we're expecting a broader rollout very soon. Again, Facebook not being incredibly helpful about exactly when the broader rollout's coming or the stages that it might be happening in. But we're very much expecting these restrictions to apply to sectors and topics, including politics, race, sexuality, gender identity, refugee status, and personal hardship. So I'm sure issues that loads of you are working on should probably impact, a huge swathe of the charity sector. And what it means is that it will be more difficult or impossible to set up campaigns optimized towards mid to lower funnel events like lead and purchase. So to try and explain what this means, basically at the moment when you set up campaigns, you can set them up so that when somebody clicks on your ads, Meta not only knows what type of person clicks on your ads, but as they navigate through your site and go on to take actions, whether that's signing a petition type action, a hand raiser, or donating, or making a purchase, through either the Meta Pixel or the Conversions API, that data gets fed back to Meta. So Meta understands what type of person, what type of profile is not just most likely to click on the ad, but it's actually most likely to go on and convert. And therefore it can target ads at other people that it thinks are most likely to convert. That just helps it deliver the ads really effectively, and means it keeps the costs down. These restrictions are going to make that, as I say, much more difficult or impossible to do. So instead, you'll be relying on Meta learning what types of people are clicking on the ad, but not necessarily who are most likely to go on to convert. So yeah, clearly could be quite a serious impact for lots of us. And if the changes are kind of rolled out as Meta have explained, it means there'll be no more pixel data for conversion campaigns. As I tried to explain then, that means the algorithm won't know who's the most likely to convert. It means it'll be less sophisticated in who it's targeting, and that could well result in a higher cost per conversion. Obviously, that means within your total campaign budget, you're likely to see fewer signups, fewer donations, fewer campaign or event actions taken. Basically, whatever you're trying to drive people to do could become more expensive and result in fewer people doing it. And the reason we're also concerned about this, obviously, we're all working for amazing causes, having amazing real world impact. And the challenge is to avoid that resulting in less real world impact. So yes, that's probably all sounds quite concerning. I think we are keen to stress that while this might sound kind of scary, this is kind of the way that Meta's explained it. The big caveat here is that it's really early days. We don't yet have the data to know exactly how these changes are going to affect everything. If the costs do rise as a result, we don't know by how much just yet. And also, there might well be workarounds, which we're going to talk about in a lot more detail later on in the webinar, that help us navigate these changes. So I guess to stress, this is the kind of scary side of the coin, but the reason that we're here talking to you today is to help you navigate these changes, and to make sure that you can get through it and continue to have the amazing impact that you already do. So we're very much here to help you navigate this, and less impact isn't inevitable. We thought it'd be useful to just tell you how to know if you are affected. I'm sure many of you might have seen this already, but if you go into your Meta Business Manager account, in your event section, you are looking out for an alert that looks like this. This tells you that you've been categorized within one of the restricted categories. If you click into it, you'll be able to see which domains have been categorized. So you might have your main domain that has been affected and possibly subdomains that aren't yet. But I guess just to say, as the rollout comes, it's likely that even more of those domains will be impacted. I think if you click in, you'll also have to see an option to appeal your categorization. So if you think you've been incorrectly categorized, for example, as working on health, and that's not an area you work in, by all means, you can appeal, and that might, for now at least, mean you can run campaigns in the same way you were previously. But I guess just to stress, even if you're not impacted at the moment, you don't have an alert like this at the moment, it's highly likely that it is coming at some point in the near future. Okay, yeah, so that's a brief explanation of what these changes are. We wanted to start with a bit of a temperature check. Hopefully Florence is just launching a poll. We'd love to know how many people on the call have already been impacted by these tracking changes. You should be able to just vote in the poll. Okay, so a reasonable amount of you already being impacted. Yeah, this is kind of what we expected, I suppose. Um, as I say, yeah, it feels mainly like health organisations that are being affected so far. But if you are working in a different area and you have been impacted, we'd love to know. So please do drop that in the chat. Um, but yeah, for those of you who haven't been affected yet, that's great. It means you can continue to run campaigns as you did previously, but definitely still worth starting to think about what you need to do once they probably will come in and affect you in the near future. For those of you that have been affected, we'd love to know if you're continuing to run activity, whether you've seen your costs rise. So yeah, I think there's just another yes, no question for those of you who have been impacted. Just give everyone a minute to vote. Okay. Yeah, that's super interesting and super useful knowledge, actually. So, yeah, from people who have been impacted already, it's clear that it has pushed costs up. So, yeah, we'll go into a lot more detail in the rest of the webinar about potential ways to hopefully avoid the costs rising too much, but also other strategies you can use to make sure you're navigating these changes effectively. Um, One more question. We wanted to know from everyone, whether you've been impacted by these changes already or not, just how concerned you're feeling about these on a scale of one to five. So one is like, no, I don't really understand how these are going to impact me at all, or we're confident we'll come up with a workaround. But five is like, I'm really concerned. I don't understand how we're going to continue to run our campaigns in the same way. Yeah, just be really useful to get a temperature check from you, how you're feeling about these changes. Okay, fairly concerned. Yeah, I mean, it's good. Like, I think it's definitely something we should be taking seriously. But hopefully, over the next 45 minutes or however much time we've got remaining, we can help you to feel slightly less concerned and help you feel a bit more confident in how you might navigate these changes. Um, Great. Okay. I guess the start of that is just trying to put these changes in a little bit of perspective. So, um, I guess what I've said already probably does sound quite might sound a bit scary, but the key crucial point is that the digital landscape is ever evolving. That's the beauty of digital. It is always changing. And this is just the latest in a long line of things that have shifted and that we've needed to adapt to. So for some of you, if you've been in the sector long enough, you might even remember a time pre-Facebook, certainly pre-Facebook ads, which didn't launch till about 2007. And even in our time, so we were born as an agency in 2015, there have been a lot of big shifts that we've had to adapt to. GDPR came into effect in 2017, which I'm sure lots of you will remember well, but had big impact on the way you're able to opt people onto your mailing list. There was a lot of concern at the time about how many people you'd be able to communicate with and state of growing a list and all those kind of things. Similarly, 2018 to 2020, maybe a more positive change, but a big expansion of ad formats across Meta, which meant lots of adaptation, a big period of testing and learning what ad formats were right for us, what ones worked well to actually drive action. And even in the last couple of years, we've seen detailed targeting options removed within Meta. So again, that was something that was a lot of concern, particularly amongst people who are doing really granular targeting. That made it much more difficult and meant audiences just had to be that little bit broader. And even now, ongoing, for those of you who are kind of active in running Meta campaigns, you'll no doubt have seen the extent to which Meta is pushing you to use their AI features, the Advantage Plus features, on everything from budgeting to placements to actually optimizing your creative itself. So yeah, basically just to stress, there've been lots of challenges, lots of changes before we've all had to shift and adapt to. We all have adapted before, we will adapt again. It's just about understanding why and collectively learning the best way to go about this. Um, so yeah, that's a little bit about what the changes are. Now on to the important bit, I guess, which is what do we do about this? And we split this into two sections. As I say, firstly, we want to talk about adapting within Meta, what you might do once you see these restrictions impacting your accounts. And the first thing you should be definitely considering is, are there workarounds that we can put in place? And by workarounds, we essentially mean things that just help mean that Meta still gets the data that it knows that it needs to understand who it is that's most likely to convert, and essentially to help you continue to run campaigns in a very similar way to you were previously. Um, Before I explain what these workarounds are or how you kind of go about them, there is a big caveat here, which is, as I say, these restrictions are still very new. And even as an agency working with lots of partners, we haven't really had an opportunity to test these in practice. We do know of organizations who are using these, and so far they seem to be working very effectively. Um, but we don't know how Meta intends to enforce the new rules in the long term. So it might be that these workarounds work in the short term, but in the long term, Meta comes up with new ways of enforcing the rules, which means they don't want these to kind of be used anymore. And also, I guess a big caveat: we don't quite know what the penalties might be if they do consider these to be a kind of violation of the new rules. So if you are considering using these workarounds, and we think they're really interesting and definitely things you should be considering, but we don't want to say 100% go ahead and implement these without warning you if there might be a slight risk of penalties being applied if Meta considers them a violation. And so you just need to weigh up how catastrophic would it be if we did get penalized or see a temporary suspension on our account, those kind of things. Again, I want to stress we haven't come across that yet. Everyone we know that are using these workarounds, they seem to be working effectively, but we wanted to be completely honest and just flag the possible risk, given that it's such early days and we don't quite know how it's going to look in the long term. But yeah, workarounds that we think are probably the most effective for now. There are kind of two ways to go about it. One is creating custom events that simply mirror your conversion events. As I say, we know of some organizations, particularly commercial organizations, that are using these. And with a little bit of technical know-how, you can basically create custom events on your site for almost anything. But by doing that, you're essentially just mirroring the standard Meta events for things like leads and purchases. And it's the most simple, in theory, the most effective workaround because it means that you can essentially continue to run campaigns in exactly the same way you were before. So it should avoid those costs being pushed up too much. The second way, and slightly, depending on your setup, potentially a slightly simpler way, you can optimize towards page views of specific URLs. So again, within the custom conversion or event setup tool in Meta, you can set up rules that, for example, everybody who arrives at a certain URL, you're optimizing towards people who arrive at a certain URL. So if you have, for example, a donation journey where people land on a donate page, but then once they complete the donation, it's like donate/thank you. You could optimize towards everyone who gets to that thank you page. And essentially that means Meta will be learning, again, who's most likely not just to get to the landing donate page, but actually to complete their donation and arrive at the thank you page. So both of these we think are workarounds which you should 100% be considering. But we just wanted to make sure that you're kind of weighing up the risk as you do that. But yes, undoubtedly for some of you, workarounds might not work either because you're slightly concerned about the long-term impact, or as I say, potentially in the long term, the workarounds will be shut down or Meta will find new ways of enforcing things so the workarounds stop working. So we did want to set out alternatives and what you could do if that is the case. The first thing to say is that you'll need to set up your campaign slightly differently. So rather than optimizing towards leads, as Meta won't have that data, you'll be optimizing towards higher funnel events, things like landing page views or traffic. And this, if you do that by itself, that's definitely likely to result in higher costs. So your journey will need to work harder down the line, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But essentially what that means is Meta will just be optimizing towards people that are most likely to click on your ads, and it won't know who's going to go on to convert. And if you set your campaigns up in that way, it just means you're operating with new rules, and therefore new tactics might become more relevant and more important once again. So we want to set out what some of those were. Firstly, audiences may become super important again. And it's really interesting. Audiences were really, really important. You kind of interest targeting, all those kind of things. We have found that as the algorithms got more sophisticated, often when you're running campaigns, you might find that broad audiences work actually better than more targeted audiences. And that's because, as I say, Meta's able to learn really quickly as it gets the data what type of people are going on to convert. So you can leave it targeting the whole of the UK population, but the algorithm will sophisticatedly know what type of people within that to serve ads to. Without that data, it's going to do that less effectively. So the more information you can give it about who to target, the better. So running kind of interest-based audiences might just become much more important again, and you might see that outperforming broad audiences and kind of reversing the trends of the last kind of few years. Um, Linked to that, retargeting audiences could definitely be more important again. Um, Very similar theory here, but if you've got permission, for example, to upload your existing supporter base to Facebook so that you can target them directly, particularly for kind of donation campaigns, that could be a really effective tactic to test. And similarly, retargeting through a kind of funnel model, something that a lot of you might do already, but for example, using video assets that are quite short, kind of 15, 30 seconds, and optimizing campaigns just for views of those assets, then you can then create custom audiences for people who viewed, say, a certain percentage, 50% of that video. And that just means that then you're targeting people who are interested in what you have to say, they've engaged with you before. So you can run an effective retargeting campaign with a warmer audience, and you're giving Meta that data about who's most likely to convert rather than just relying on them to know who's most likely to click on an ad. The final thing that could be really interesting to test is lead gen forms. There's always been a big drawback of lead gen forms, which is basically the post-action journey and that UX. So if you're directing people to your own landing pages, you've got loads of control, you can do loads of testing on the journey once people get there. And that's super important for a number of reasons. But one of the most crucial reasons is that we know somebody who's just completed an action is really primed to take a second action immediately. So if you're running lead gen activity, pointing people to hand raisers or kind of petition style sign up pages, as soon as they sign that action, we find huge success in immediately asking them to take another action, whether that's donating, volunteering, taking further campaign actions. That is like the optimum time to get somebody to do something else. With lead gen forms, and also you can then stack those actions. So if somebody's not ready to donate, you could ask them to volunteer. You can stack those actions and have a really seamless UX so that you're basically capitalizing on their initial engagement and making sure they feel really engaged from an early stage in their journey. With lead gen forms, you just don't get the same customizability. So there are less copy options. You only typically get one kind of post action button. So that's always been the drawback of lead gen forms. I guess as you kind of lose the tracking on your web pages, using lead gen forms which work within Meta means Meta will know who is signing them and it will be able to optimize more effectively. So it could well result in a lower cost per lead initially. I guess the important thing if you are testing that is just to then make sure you're looking at the journey. So, okay, our initial cost per lead might be lower, but are they going on to convert in the same way they would if we're directing people to our web pages? So make sure you're assessing the full extent of the journey. We also think there could be some really interesting testing here around kind of hybrid models where people might use the lead gen form, but then you use the button to point to, say, a kind of daisy chain on your website where you can still stack actions in the way that you more traditionally would. I guess the final thing to stress within Meta is that what hasn't changed is that your ad creative still needs to work really hard, still needs to stand out, and within your campaigns structure, you still need to be doing lots of testing. So having plenty of image variants to test, plenty of copy variants, testing your CTAs and your descriptions, all those things which are kind of best practice fundamentally haven't changed, and you still need to be making ads which compel people to stop what they're doing, to click, that drive that emotion and get them to want to do something for you. And yes, we just got a few examples of ads which we've worked on recently, which have converted really well. I think, this is just to kind of demonstrate variety and it hopefully inspire you to think about how could we be using images, graphics, videos, different ad formats, just to make sure that you're testing what it is that works for you. I'm just going to try and play a couple of these videos.
Exercising your right is a hot thing to do.
Voting, hot or not?
Definitely hot.
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 Hot. Hot. Hot. Hot. Hot. Hot. Hot. Hot. Hot.
Are you going to vote?
Yes, because I'm hot.
I hope you could all hear that okay. Yeah, that was an ad creative we developed recently for Just Vote campaign, aiming to get young people registered to vote in a general election. Obviously, you can see where the format went out on Instagram and I think Snapchat as well. Yeah, a similar topic, obviously inspiring young people to get out to mobilize and to vote in the election. But you can just see quite a different style. So yeah, just to stress, it's about variety, it's about different types of content, it's about finding what it is that works for you. And interestingly, both of those converted really well. So there's not one right or wrong way to go about it. It's about very much about experimentation. And then yeah, you can see on the right a couple of static ads. Interestingly, static often performs just as well as video, if not better. But again, just very different approaches, from being really topical and tapping into things like even weather events or what's going on in the world, versus just standout graphics that really stand out in people's feed and get them to stop scrolling.
Exercising your right as a hot.
Hot or not?
Definitely hot. Hot.
Sorry, play it again. It's so good. Great. Yeah, we just wanted to ask one more question then, which is just to understand how many tests you're running in Meta at the moment, whether it's something you do extensively, something you don't. So yeah, you should be able to take as many options as you want here, but it'd be lovely to know how much testing you're currently doing within Meta. Great. Okay. Loads of you testing creative, which is brilliant, and plenty of you testing other things as well. A few of you not testing at all. I think definitely worth stressing. Testing is always super important, but even more so at times of change. So if you've got the capacity, or if you can kind of invest in the capacity, now is definitely the time to be doing it. Yeah, it's always the time to be doing it, but I guess periods of change, it becomes even more important to be testing regularly and making sure you're learning how to navigate these changes and what works for you. And yes, for those of you that are testing, for example, creative, it's definitely potentially other areas to be thinking about, even more tests. Cool. I'm now going to hand over to Flo to talk a bit more about how you can adapt beyond Meta.
Thanks, Ross. Yeah, great. So now we've explored some of those immediate changes within Meta. We thought it'd be helpful to think about what you can do outside of Meta. A lot of these tips are great to do anyway, but I think if costs are likely to rise, and which we've seen some of them already are for you, it's more important than ever that we consider these. And the first tip that we're looking at is how to grow your first party data. So how do we grow our list? Some of you listening are probably already doing a fantastic job of this, but we wanted to give a quick recap of some of the best practice. So the first one is thinking about low barrier sign-up points. Hand raisers are a great way to build a movement of people who share the same values as you. So just the act of adding your name is a low barrier action that helps people signal their solidarity with an issue, and then can go on to receive further email communications and take more actions. And then when it comes to touch points, we're recognizing that Meta is likely to still play an important part of any growth strategy. And it's probably likely that there's not going to be a single platform that's going to overtake it at this point or produce the same results. But it's worth considering other touch points. So paid social ads are a brilliant and effective way of finding your audience. But have you considered other platforms like paid search? Could you look at your owned organic web pages? Are there particular pages that are experiencing higher traffic, and could you add a sign up button there? Or perhaps you could look at your influencer strategy or how you might achieve more earned coverage. I think it's just worth thinking about the broader ecosystem of your touch points. We also see that using like cultural references and everyday moments can be really helpful as hooks. So what we're talking about here is any sort of current news events, things that feel really important to your audience. Could you be creating organic social posts and then look to retarget people who've engaged with your page? Or could you even use those timely hooks as part of your paid social content? Just worth considering. And then when you're actually asking people to sign up to receive further content and emails, it's really important to consider your opt-in copy. So does it create a compelling reason to sign up to learn more? And equally important, if people are selecting no, is there a nudge that you can give people to stay with you and receive that additional information and actions. These are just like small points which actually can really impact CPL and people's interest in hearing more from you. And we wanted to just touch upon Dignity in Dying, who's a partner of ours. Some of you might have attended our last webinar, so you might already have quite a good understanding of how fantastic a movement they are. But we just wanted to bring this case study to your attention because this is a movement that's grown significantly through a range of different actions, and those actions are at different levels. So they have low bar actions, higher bar actions, fundraising, campaigning. And the important thing is in growing this movement, they've been able to mobilize that supporter base and get people to actually work towards mobilizing at key moments like the assisted dying bill. So if the first tip was more about growing your list, the second tip is thinking about how you convert your supporters. So you've already done all that brilliant work to attract the supporters. Now, what can you do to get the people you've already got to work harder for you? And with it potentially getting a bit more expensive to bring new supporters into the top of the funnel, we believe it's even more important that you take every opportunity to engage and convert those at the middle of the funnel and at the bottom of the funnel. So if we're looking at that top part where we're attracting new supporters, we need to make sure that we are taking every opportunity to make it easy and interesting to convert the people at the sort of middle section, which is where we're looking at daisy chain and email welcome series. And then also at the bottom of the funnel where people are taking more involved actions, they are potentially receiving ongoing emails and communication. And we want to be clear here that when we're talking about conversions, this could be any action, so financial or non-financial. Essentially, any action drives further action. So that might be someone signing up for a monthly donation, or it could be someone clicking to sign up for a fundraising event, or even just clicking to view your social channels. So that's why we're suggesting we widen the funnel. So if it used to cost you £1 to recruit a new supporter into that top section, and it starts costing you £2, then you'd need to compel twice as many people to act once they're in the funnel to drive the same amount of action further down the bottom of the funnel. And if you already have a big supporter list, which I'm sure many of the organisations here today do, it's even more important that you're keeping the ones that you've got engaged in your supporter list involved and are kept sort of interested in the actions that you're provided. So how do we boost conversion through that lower end of the funnel? Email is just a great way to convert people into action. It's free, but there are a few considerations to make sure that you're continuing to offer new, relevant, and meaningful ways to take action. So I think one of the first things that we wanted to bring attention to is if you're communicating with people on a regular basis, how can you connect it to a real world event, make it feel really relevant to the time that you're emailing? This example from Refuge called upon supporters to sign an open letter to Liz Truss using the context of the delayed legislation on the online safety bill. So it's just pulling on that recent news event or what's really timely to prompt people to act. Another really effective way to keep your weekly emails engaging is to provide unexpected actions. So this example from Freedom from Torture was actually calling on supporters to sign an open letter to Spanish football teams, asking them not to use the airline privilege style, which was an airline that was originally involved in the Flights to Rwanda scheme. So I think this was a really helpful target because it was quite unusual. So it stood out against more expected actions, but also the more unusual the target and the action, the more likely the real world impact it could potentially have, because those targets are less likely to be facing other supporter campaign tactics. But also, weekly emails are a fantastic opportunity to celebrate your wins and the positive things that have happened. This is I think, a really nice way of keeping people motivated with your cause, especially in a news cycle, which is really difficult at times. So yeah, this is a lovely example from Surfers Against Sewage. And I think they do a fantastic job of just showing how their community are having such amazing wins up and down the country. And of course, emails are a great way to ask for money, but it's finding ways to ask for money in different ways. So it could be during an appeal, or it could be at a timely event. It's just a fantastic way of giving people an opportunity to give when they can. So we've already mentioned Surfers Against Sewage, but we wanted to pull them out because they are a partner of ours and we think they do weekly emails really well. We didn't work on all the emails featured here, but you can see some of the varied supporter actions that people are encouraged to take off the back of those emails. So on the left, you've got a direct sort of fundraising ask during an appeal. In the middle, there is a petition ask around banning the bailouts for water companies. And then on the right, there's a really lovely example of a community member who is fundraising for Surfers Against Sewage, and it's inviting the rest of the community to take on a sort of fundraising event and do it in their own way. So there's this really nice mix of styles and asks, which keeps the weekly emails interesting, but also relevant to different interests. And another organisation that we really wanted to hero was the Humane League. Again, we didn't work on this particular campaign, but what we really liked about it was how it was personalising that email experience. So in this email, you were invited to relive your highlights from the last year with the Humane League, and you were able to personalise the actual video that you were watching. So you could choose to look at the protest action or any of the other different parts of the organisation's work over the last year. And I think there's a couple of reasons this worked really well. A, it's really high value content, so it cuts above more expected email asks and content, but also it was tapping into existing behaviour that we know that supporters were already really interested in. So thinking about like wrapped reels and people highlighting their key moments of the year. So it just shows that actually things can really stand out when they're offering that higher value content. There are also a few things you can do just to strengthen your UX. So first of all, just having a look at your sign up pages and considering, are they clear and concise? Is it really clear to a supporter what they need to do and why they need to do it? This feels like a bit of an easy win, but is a really important consideration when you're thinking about boosting conversions. And also within sign up pages, once someone has signed up, how can they be seamlessly nudged to take further actions without actually leaving the page? So this is an example using our Blueprint platform, which is designed to keep people within the journey through scrolling daisy chain asks so that they're not getting interrupted by loading a new page each time. And we found that this is a really successful way of giving people lots of diverse different actions that they could take, and also just keeping them within that journey. And there might be other platforms that you could use to boost financial actions taken or boost the value of the donations given. So again, this isn't a page that we created. It's actually using Fundraise Up. But what we really like about that platform is that there are all sorts of different behavioural nudges you can give to prompt people to donate more. As you can see with the monthly button, there's a nice heart next to it. And it's just simple things like that that can really help convert people to donate that little bit more or to sign up for a regular gift. And then finally, we just wanted to talk a bit about testing. So testing is actually one of the main ways that you can see what works for you. And I think, as Ross said, especially with costs set to rise, testing is going to become even more important just to understand how you can boost conversions. So we carried out some testing with Sense just to gain an understanding of what tactics would help increase financial actions taken. And as you can see here, we had a look at referencing what the average gift was and saying like what other supporters had given. And that acted as a form of social proof. So we asked, could you match this or go even further? And that actually created an increase in the average gift amount of £3.60. And then we also carried out some testing through a value exchange of offering a PIN badge. And this is such a sort of simple product, but actually really helped to increase the donate rate and the average gift. And what's great about this product too is that it's helping to spread awareness of the issue and people can wear it with a sense of pride as well. So there's that act of solidarity and spreading awareness as well as increasing the donate rate by 0.7%. So that's it from us. It's been really, really lovely to present to you all, and we're really looking forward to hearing some of your questions. So I'll just pass over to Helen.
Thank you so much, Ross and Flo, for talking us through that. Really great information. I know there was so many topics that we covered there, so we obviously dug into the meta side of things and then we zoomed out a bit as well. So if that felt like a bit too much of a top line whistle stop tour, I've just put a link into our YouTube channel. We do have lots of more in-depth webinars on specific things like email or lead generation. So yes, if that would be helpful, do look at those as well. We've also had lots of questions coming in, which is fantastic. We're going to start with the kind of broader ones. Let's just start with, it's quite hard to answer, but let's just get it out there. Someone has asked, do we know why these meta changes are being brought in? I know that was my first thought. It was like, why are you doing this to us? So I have a few thoughts. Ross, do you want to take a stab at that, or do you want me to take that one?
You can go first. It's essentially for privacy reasons, but
yeah.
Do you want to you can give a better explanation than me?
Probably not. No, I mean, yes. I mean, the official explanation is around privacy. As we know, there is definitely a shift in people wanting more privacy when they're browsing online. So they're introducing like these particular topics around health to stop businesses or organizations using that information to then target people. So yeah, there is a privacy side to it. Obviously, the flip side is that we're being caught up. Often our organizations are trying to do good and actually support people that are affected by these issues. So we're kind of all being caught in the same net as well as the kind of like, for example, big pharma companies who are trying to find people with certain health conditions so that they can target them for commercial reasons. We don't know the real reasons. In forums that I've been in and kind of Slack communities, there's also quite a lot of opinions around that, it's kind of a hat tip and Meta aren't actually that interested in protecting people, which is why a lot of these kind of workarounds that Ross talked through, setting up mirror custom conversions, are actually working fine because Meta aren't too interested in actually really cracking down on this. Translate from that what you will, is that a good or a bad thing? But yes, as there's lots of speculation out there. Okay, let's move on to another question. So another one here. So if your charity hasn't fallen into the categories currently being restricted, is there any knock-on effect if you have a shared target audience, or should things continue to work as normal for now?
So yeah, my understanding is that if you haven't been impacted yet, things should continue to function as they were previously. Interestingly, I had a quick scroll through the comments. I can see some of you saying you're seeing costs rise, even though you haven't been impacted. Obviously, there are a huge number of factors which go into costs at any one time. It could be creative fatigue, but also we do generally see fluctuations around time of year. So yeah, worth just closely monitoring all your metrics. So like, is it CPM, so the cost you're paying to deliver your ads, which is being impacted? Is it the click-through rate, where fewer people actually clicking on your ads? Making sure you have that really comprehensive data so you can understand why your costs are fluctuating. But yeah, to answer the question, I think my understanding is that if you haven't been impacted by the categorizations yet, you're running on the same model, Meta's got the same information to optimize, so it should continue to work in the same way. But yeah, those changes will no doubt be coming to impact you pretty soon.
Thanks, Ross. Yeah, exactly. And just to add to that, because we have other questions about the general cost of conversion increasing, I think, as well as everything Ross just said, I think that just increased privacy with people switching to kind of browsers that don't track them, and going sort of using those modes means that there is just less information for the algorithms to work with, which I think is just contributing to, yeah, not being able to find people in the way that Facebook used to, and that is just generally pushing costs up as well. Is basically having to guess more about who to show your ads to. Okay, so let's stay in Meta for now, because most of the questions are quite Meta specific. So there's a question here: if our pixel is impacted, does that mean the whole website is affected? For example, if I wanted to optimize for a thank you page, does it need to be a third party? So I think this is about domains.
Yeah, so I'll try to answer this, obviously with the caveat that we've said that these restrictions are still quite new, so I think everybody's still learning. But I think we've definitely seen instances where like subdomains are categorized differently to the main domains. And I think there have been suggestions that, for example, you could have like a separate domain, for example, which doesn't have health related content. And that could be a way to get around the issue. I think we were struggling to really see this as an effective solution, just because like if you campaign on health, for example, basically the restrictions which Meta have said they're going to roll out feel so all encompassing. It was difficult to imagine how you'd have content on a separate domain which doesn't talk about your issues. But yeah, definitely, I think you could see an impact on like the main domain, but not on subdomains at the moment, while this rollout hasn't happened in full. But I think it's increasingly likely that it will capture all domains as it gets rolled out. And yeah, I think we found it hard to envisage how you could have a subdomain which doesn't have any kind of trigger content, just because it feels so like crucial to the issues that you're talking about. But be really interested to hear if anyone has tried that, or has kind of experienced domains being categorized separately despite them having similar content.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'd be super interesting to know in the chat if anyone is seeing that. I think there's definitely a few people we're working with or have seen where the main domain has been restricted, but our Blueprint site, which is where we run our actions, or for example, like an engaging networks domain where they're running actions, is fine at the moment. So it definitely does seem to be some variation across different domains. Okay, another question, quite a specific one around the categories. So someone is asking here about the personal hardship category. Do we have any clearer definitions for what personal hardship entails? Yeah, any thoughts on that? I don't think we do.
The short answer is no. Yes, Meta, as often the case, I think of being unhelpfully specific about what that includes. Certainly keeping our ear close to the ground, and yeah, love to kind of keep understanding from all of you if you've been impacted. And I guess it will become clearer as that gets rolled out exactly what kind of issues that covers and what Meta is categorizing as personal hardship. Because yes, it was like very vague category.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit of a wait and see. And then one more just on Meta again. This is a very general one, but good to address it, I think. So what is the best way to combat meta fatigue? So where ads are converting well at the start of a campaign and then start slowing down?
Yeah, really good question. I think there are a few things here. I think firstly, to go back to what I said before, making sure that you really capture data comprehensively so that you can understand what point of the journey it is that's getting fatigued. So is it, is it that Facebook's charging you more to deliver the ads? If so, is that because they're kind of not ranked, like they're not engaging people, they're not kind of, the quality is kind of marked down by Meta, in which case it's charging you more to serve them. Is it the kind of rate you're spending at? That's often like, there's often a really strong correlation between how quickly you're spending and how effective they are. So are you trying to spend too quickly and there's not enough audiences? You're kind of saturating your audiences essentially. Is it, so yeah, there are lots of ways. Is it the click through? Is it the frequency? So your audiences are just seeing them so often, but making sure you have that really comprehensive data is kind of crucial to understanding what it is that's driving that ad fatigue. Once you've got that, then you can kind of work on a solution from there. So for example, if you see people are seeing the same ad over and over again, so your frequency starts rising above 2, you probably want to think about, are there different ways we could be framing this issue? Are there, as we spoke about in the kind of creative section, are there different kind of ad formats we could be rolling out? Could we be, testing graphics? There's also often quite simple ways that you can take high performing ads and just kind of iterate on them to make them feel a bit fresh and a bit new. So if you have kind of static photographs, which we often find actually work quite well, but then you could overlay them with some kind of call to action buttons or a quote, just make them feel a little bit different and potentially work for a slightly different audience or just grab people's attention in a slightly different way. So just iterating on that creative so that you're getting as much as you can out of every asset you have without them getting fatigued. But yeah, I'd say it's really important you have that fundamental data so that you can understand exactly what it is that's driving fatigue.
And just to add to that, just on the creative point, I think it's quite helpful to actually start out with some different iterations of the ads that you're creating. So whether that's different iterations of the static visual or whether it's the copy, just so that you can test and see what's performing the best from the get-go.
Fantastic, thank you. Another question here around being able to recruit leads that are more likely to convert. So when we talk about that widening the funnel, this is a really great question, actually. So if we're looking to, for example, this person is looking to go after, to use telemarketing to convert leads, and they're thinking of putting up that first ask in the telemarketing to something a bit more involved. And they're asking, how can we acquire leads that are much more likely to give in that conversion funnel? So through telemarketing, obviously trying to balance the cost per lead to start with.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel like I'm going to go back to talking about data again, but this is like one of the reasons it's so important to track that data throughout the full journey. So I guess this is what the question's getting at a little bit, but you might well be prepared to pay that little bit more for that initial lead if you know they're a group which are much more likely to go on to take action. We've done quite a lot of testing, I feel like, around capturing telemarketing and phone numbers in projects recently. And like, it probably makes sense, but just it kind of goes back to the simplicity of how easy is it to give you that data? Is it clear why they're giving you that data? Does the opt-in feel really compelling? All those kind of best practice points which apply more broadly, much the same for capturing phone leads. But yeah, it's a really good question, I think, and gets to that fundamental point of like, you could probably stomach a rise in your cost per lead as long as you're measuring that long-term impact of like, are these leads much more likely to go on to convert because they're really high quality? So making sure you're not just focused on that cost per lead metric, but focused on the long-term impact of these supporters going to do is super important.
Thank you, Ross. I think we're almost at time. I just want to ask one question, because we've had a few questions come in about this before the webinar, actually, and it's not a topic we particularly touched on today, but I know there's other changes happening at Meta that around moderation, cutting back on their moderation, and a lot of people are experiencing an increase in hate and difficult comments on their posts, especially their ads and boosted posts. There's a lot of people asking how do we deal with this? I just wondered if there's any very top line advice we can give here. I'm also going to drop a link in the chat, because I saw there is actually a webinar from another agency, Social AF, who are running something on this exact topic next week, I think. So that might be a good one if that is an issue you're concerned about on Meta. But yeah, any top line thoughts on that, Ross or Flo?
Yes, this is a really good question. When we get a lot of one that is incredibly difficult, like, because I think especially, I think people probably aren't advertising on X anymore, but towards the, a few months ago, that was particularly relevant on X as well. I guess for a few solutions, I think there is like a technical solution that's applicable for some people in actually disabling comments, and that's worth investigating and considering. I can't give the full explanation of how to do that here, but for some people that's possible. I guess the downside of that is that it potentially limits engagement and means your ads become more expensive, but it might be a step worth taking. Again, you might be happy to take a slight kind of increase in your costs, even if in return for not getting those kind of trolling or negative comments. I think the other thing just to really keep in mind is who you're targeting. So again, by trying to find the right audiences and the audiences that are really aligned with your values, hopefully it means Facebook is serving it to fewer people that are antagonistic or trolls essentially. So thinking about that audience targeting carefully and doing some testing there. You can also, I think, yeah, so I guess also then thinking about the impact of the people who are actually doing the moderation is really key. So you could have rotors, you can have like stock answers ready, but just checking in with those people, making sure they're feeling okay, and that they're feeling supported and they know how to deal with those comments. It's really important. I'm sure there's loads more to say on that. So yeah, that webinar sounds really interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Ross. All great advice. Okay, we're almost at time, or we are at time. We like to finish a bit early so you can get to your 10 o'clock meetings on time. If we didn't get to your question, we've got them all, don't worry. We're going to answer them as we always do, and write that up in a blog, which we'll send you the link to in an email. But yeah, we had so many questions today. Thank you so much, Ross and Flo. I really hope that was helpful and practical, and gives you lots of ideas to take back to your teams. And yeah, as always, we're happy to chat. If you want to drop us an email and talk about any of this in more detail, or get support with running your Meta campaigns, then yeah, we're always happy to talk. Have great weeks, and thank you for coming along again. See you soon.